So my name is Monica Jean. I'm a field crops educator based in the Saginaw Bay region out of Mount Pleasant area, and I'm your host for today. Okay, so this is a little bit different setup than what we usually do. So we're going to do Jeff with the weather report first, and then it's going to be pretty much, we call it hot topic, which means it's a longer session of questions and answers for you guys to have more time in order to bring up topics that are concerning you out in the farm. There's a couple questions in here having to do with the smoke, wildfire smoke, and I think we have had questions like this in the past, and so they're both about how is that smoke going to affect maturing for this season? Could that, I think probably that cloud cover affect the maturing on time for this season? But then there was also a question about how did it affect last year? So this season and last year. Any comments there? I see Manny.
Right. Manny's ready to go.
Hmm.
I'll just start, but there is a new study from Ohio State, and actually one of my good friends and colleagues there, Aaron Wilson. They did a study in the Eastern Corn Belt for last year because the conditions there were similar to what we had here in Michigan, and what they concluded was a little bit of a help or benefit of the smoke last year, and it's for reasons that you might not think about, but do make sense. We've talked about one of the things that smoke does is we get more diffuse solar radiation. And the good news about that is, well, the bad news is if you want the direct solar, we have less of that when we have the smoke. But that diffuse radiation is better getting into the crop canopies or getting down to the bottom of the canopies where the vegetation can utilize it and make more dry matter. And that's what we want in our production system. And so that's a little bit of a benefit. The other one is, and this is the interesting one, it's more of the meteorology geeks out there, but that is that the smoke keeps the maximum temperatures during the day a little cooler than they would be otherwise. And for most of the Corn Belt, that's a good thing. We actually see a positive response in terms of most vegetative growth and development when it's a little bit cooler during the day, less stressful. And so collectively, they concluded that there was a little bit, it was hard to quantify how much, but probably a little bit of a help or benefit. Now, one last thing too, and I'm sure Manny will comment on this. The smoke is a wild card. We looked at this in Michigan with the numbers last year, interestingly, and we expected to see solar radiation, which of course drives our whole system. We expected that to be lower because of the smoke, but we found actually the opposite. It was on several days where we had really, really hazy skies. That's when we really saw a drop off. But especially because of a very, very unusually warm and dry late spring and early summer last year, fewer clouds, we got more solar radiation collectively during the whole growing season than we did versus normal. So that we didn't expect. So it's a reminder that these smoke events are there. Yes, they happen and they're really noticeable, but the timing of them and how frequent they are is probably a major factor. And even last year, they probably were not enough to make a difference in how much solar energy was coming in. And we could say this year it's even fewer. So far, it's even less than what we had last year. So I guess my personally right now, if you had to really make a guess, it would be that there would not be much of a discernible impact certainly at this point, or not expected anywhere in the immediate future. I don't, Manny, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you pretty much answered, I think, what was on my mind. I think we think negatively for the most part. And again, it is probably true, right? We don't want smoke, but yeah, once we get it, the negative impacts on crop growth and development are probably as not severe as we might expect it to be, right? I think light availability is a big one. And as Jeff said, there are studies out of California as well that shows that, yeah, the direct sunlight goes down, but the diffuse part, the ones that get scattered in the canopy, goes up. So
Hmm.
it's a slight net positive. And it's actually in a corn canopy that might be useful, right? Because we have a deeper canopy and the light can penetrate a little bit more deeper. However, corn is a C4 plant, right? If you go back to the physiology, and it's more limited by light level than a soybean plant, which is more limited by amount of carbon dioxide in the air. So corn plant in theory has less of an impact if the light levels are being impacted. So I think it's probably a neutral to maybe a slight net positive. There's other factors too, right? I mean, ozone levels can go up, some other particulate matters can go up. I think the only other point I want to add here is I think it also depends on the phenological stage of the plant as well. Last year, we were getting a lot of these smoke events relatively earlier in the season, when the impacts are not as severe. It worries me a little bit because now we are getting into these very critical growth stages, right? A lot of our corn is silking right now. I think more than 50% has. So I think that probably plays a role, and we really don't understand, I think, the real impacts there. I heard some reports from Ohio last year that they were seeing like a lot of abortion of flowers and pods in their soybean crops. So again, from here onwards, I think we probably want to keep an eye, but I would not be too worried about it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, both of you. We have one more weather question, and then we're going to go move on to the more general here, Jeff. So
Sure.
we make dry hay. Over the years, there have been a number of occasions when a rain shower has delayed the dry down or the forecast for a rainstorm has moved forward. We have found that on the day when a large rain event is coming, there is essentially no dew in the morning, and
Mm.
we have been able to bale acceptable dry hay on the mornings before the rain even hits. What causes the lack of dew before an approaching rainstorm? And then would we be able to see these conditions in the forecast?
Very interesting observation. And I think there is some meteorology / climatology that helps understand that. But many of the times that we do see rainfall, we have to remember that we typically get warm air ahead of the weather systems that lead to the precipitation. And if we warm up the air temperature, this would be the key. If you could go back and look at the temperature records and say that on those mornings that we did have the precipitation later, what was the air temperature? Because the air temperature, of course, the warmer it gets, the more water vapor the air can hold, and the lower the relative humidity. So we typically don't see, well, many times we don't see the air temperature fall down to the dew point temperature where you get the condensation and the long dew periods because it is warmer. The air is relatively warmer ahead of those precip systems. And that would be my response to that one. It's actually connected to warmer air temperatures on those days, and it gives and we just don't see as much condensation and dew as we would in a normal day. Well, like this morning, with a clear, calm evening and cold temperatures right next to the surface. That's when you expect to see a long duration dew event and last longer too. So interesting observation. That would be my response.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. And that is what a great observation on your farm there. I
Yeah.
think what we're gonna do really quick is we're gonna let Marty, we have quite a bit of tar spot questions coming in, and I was thinking just go ahead and have you, we can kind of bulk approach all of them, and then after that I'll do the credit stuff. How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, before you start though, I do want to mention that winterberry. So there was a question in the chat about winterberry, which is like an ornamental little red berries on a bush-like crop there. I would suggest we do have an ornamental team at MSU Extension, and I would say, connecting you with one of our educators who works on them all the time, they may have suggestions for you. So I can go ahead and put that into the chat box. Besides that, Marty, sorry about that. I just thought I'd mention it. Okay, so there's quite a few questions in here about I found a spec, what should I do? And then I saw an even more very specific a very specific example came in. So I'm just gonna let you take it away. How does that sound?
Yeah, so I think, the really important thing here is to be out scouting fields. If there's no disease, there's probably little point spraying, or at least, the chance of return on investment is greatly decreased. So just in general, making a fungicide application of corn, we see much greater return on investment when we're actually controlling diseases. So I'd say that off the bat. In terms of Dwight's question, where there was one spot found a week ago, I just make sure you're back in those fields, monitoring for what's going on. And then I guess getting into that little bit more specific question. So corn's at blister, and there's a single tar spot lesion, very, very light infection. So I'll say this, and I want you to listen very carefully because I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm going to say, but I really do believe that you probably can wait until about 50% of the plants have some level of tar spot on them. But that doesn't mean you're driving by in the truck and you see the tar spot. By then it's too late. So you do have, this is where I'm really sort of reluctant to say that, I guess, because you can get caught by this disease in terms of how quickly it's moving if you're not getting into those fields and watching. People always get surprised and then you'll get angry that I didn't tell you to spray, right? So you've really got to watch. The other thing I'll say too with the that risk map we have, and maybe let me show that. Here it is. So this map is really only telling you to scout. We've had a lot of discussions across the university folk here, and what we're going to do is put that on the map here somewhere. This is a scouting map only, not a spray map. All it's doing is telling you that we have found tar spot in that county. There could be a single lesion that was found. Your field could be completely clean. So be very, very mindful of that when you're looking at this map. I think it was very, very helpful early on when tar spot was brand new and we're trying to just get people out there to look. But we don't really want this to be used as a spray decision tool. It's a scouting decision tool. So I really think there is some time to wait. And the other thing that we've done is my slide deck starting to show now.
Yeah, it's just not in presenter mode, but we can see it.
There we go. So I put it up in presenter mode. So the other thing that we're trying to do here as well is just along with that map, giving you a sort of a guide to when we should make that fungicide application. So typically what we would say in vegetative stages, you know, especially early vegetative stages, in terms of tar spot management, I would say you're not doing anything. If you want to put that fungicide on for some plant health benefit, that's great. Good for you. Make sure you leave a check strip because otherwise you're never going to know. So where we are typically at for fungicide recommendation timings is typically from VTR1, so tassel silking, through to about the R3 growth stage. There are some exceptions to this, and we've seen that here in Michigan where dough may be almost touching dent. There can be a benefit. But, you know, that's when disease is really moving in super late, and then you're trying to get that application under control then. So really what this table is trying to do is just sort of guide you through the possible benefits from spraying. Tassel through to milk, yes, if tar spot is there, there's typically a benefit from that. And then we've put a comment there, like if you do spray at R1 early, especially if you spray it late vegetative, there's certainly a potential for a need of a second fungicide application later in the season. So you've got to remember that the fungicides will do a good job at suppressing tar spot for about 2 weeks, but then disease will begin to increase again. So if you put an application on at late vegetative or even maybe on at silking and there was no disease present and you're only planning and budgeting on one spray, you're kind of, you know, in trouble. Right. So we really want to be thinking as much as possible about scouting, watching, and waiting if possible. If, you know, again, if we're targeting tar spot, and we can wait typically through to about the milk growth stage, the R3 growth stage, sometimes a little bit beyond that if disease is late to develop. So I think that's that primary tar spot discussion. I think, you know, really just being out there scouting, watching and waiting. We don't want to apply a fungicide, you know, when it's not needed because you're not going to, you know, maximize your return on investment there. And whatever you do, make sure you leave a check strip because otherwise you're never going to know what, how things could have been. You could make the perfect timings of fungicides and we can have a very severe tar spot year and things will still look terrible. But again, if you don't have that check strip, you're not going to know, oh, yes, it did actually save me 20 or 50 bushels or whatever the case is. So I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind.
Great. I can really sympathize with Jonathan here because in my region, we're at high risk and I sound like this because I've been scouting a lot of fields and I've not seen very much. So it's tough to sit and wait. It doesn't feel good to sit and wait. So
right.
Yeah. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
Okay. The other thing I'd say too is that this is the output from the tar spotter model. I wish it was easier to jump back in time across multiple points, but it's really not. But anyway, I think that hot weather had delayed some of the, or had suppressed the amount of risk because tar spot is generally favored by cooler conditions with some moisture events. And so just looking at, July 9th, 12th, 17th, and 25th, the risk has increased again as of today for most areas in the state. And just when you're trying to use this tar spotter, it's not providing a cumulative risk at this point in time. That's something we've had discussions about, and I think that'd be really helpful. But part of the kicker is, unfortunately at this point, it still really requires you to get out and scout, understand if you have disease or not, because you can be red and at like really high risk, favorable conditions for tar spot. But if you don't have any tar spot, you don't have any risk, right? So again, you've got to complement this with some scouting. But it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the year plays out. We were certainly very concerned earlier on with tar spot, and we've seen some slowing of disease progression, probably due to those very warm temperatures that we've had that are not as favorable for tar spot development. Certainly as we come into August here, I think generally, conditions are conducive, but the other thing that happens is that we have more and more tar spot out there. So then it actually does start to increase. If it is in your field, it will start to, then increase through August. So August is in another sort of prime month to really watch for it and see if it increases. So. All right. Is there any other specific questions on tar spot or
I think we worked through all of them. There's some other disease questions about soybeans, but
Marty,
yeah.
I will bring up that some of the producers are looking at one application of a fungicide and they're trying to suppress ear molds at the same time as getting tar spot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So again, it sort of depends when tar spot is increasing. Very often, I think that silking application will have some value for tar spot, but not always, and it might not have the best suppression. So I think we want to chat a little bit about mycotoxin management too. I mean, fungicides can help, but the suppression that we see from fungicides on ear molds and mycotoxins in corn is nowhere near as good as it is in wheat. Wheat is a pretty clear deal where we can get 50% DON reduction in wheat, and there's plenty of data to support that. We've been very behind on the relative to wheat in the corn research. But the data that's out there has shown some suppression. Absolutely, it's possible, but it's generally nowhere near as great as that in wheat. So I think you need to keep that in mind too. And if you are going to spray for mycotoxins in corn, you do want to make sure you're out there at green silk. Earlier or later than that, we're really not going to get much of any suppression on the ear molds. So that's the challenge.
there was a general question about like the current forecasts and the impacts on the other corn diseases too. And I think you're pretty much covering it.
So the fusarium risk. So this this tool was set up for head scab risk, and it's still active because of the spring wheat and barley up in the Dakotas in particular. But I was pleased to see, I guess, that some of the risk had decreased a little bit. So I run the model back here to the 20th of July, and unfortunately the model's turning off because it's geared for wheat and barley. but I did see some slightly higher risk earlier in July. So I'm just hoping that, as we come in, especially those later planted crops, as they come into silking, the risk will be a little bit lower. I think fields are they weren't as stressed going into silking as they were last year as well. So I think that's going to be helpful. Last year we had a lot of unevenness within fields, extending silking window, and I think that really did contribute to our mycotoxin issues considerably.
So we're getting some soybean questions coming in here, and I think I saw Eric and probably Manny would also be able to help out with this, but there are some soybean questions coming in. One is about I planted soybeans into existed planting soybeans. How's that going to affect their growth? And I actually have had a couple of people, whether it was slug damage or damage, maybe it was really wet and they were worried about the stand in that area, plant over again. And so there's some double populations going on because some of those soybeans did come back better than they thought they would. What's your thoughts on that, Eric and Manny?
Yeah, so I'll take a shot at it, and then Manny, you can add. So generally, it's not an issue if you are replanting or double planting. We generally recommend not tearing up the original soybean planting. So most guys are going to either offset their planter or maybe, replant at a slight angle. The only situation that might be an issue that I can think of is if your first planting had decent moisture and the few plants that are out there were able to grow down into that moisture, and then your replant is into dry conditions, and then those plants, would be water lacking, and so then you may get competition. That second planting may not take off. And then the only other thing I can think of is in those areas, if you've got real dense, lush growth, maybe those would be the first areas you want to scout for if you have some disease potential, like a white mold. Manny, do you have any other insights on that?
Not really. I mean, pretty much soybeans are very forgiving, in terms of competition between plants. Unlike corn, in corn, we do not ever want to see that. Marty was talking about that, plants not at the same phenological stage, and there are much more challenges there. On the soybean side, they're able to, compensate either way. So I think except disease pressure, if that becomes an issue, like if you have white mold issues, and you want to hit it at the right stage, I think that probably can become a challenge. But yeah, overall, we don't see, I think, too many issues. And we do recommend gap filling interplanting rather than replanting on the soybean side. So going at an angle, and soybean plants are able to deal with that. You might see some differences in terms of maturity, so yeah, I think keeping an eye in terms of harvesting, hitting at the right stage is probably important as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. There's also a question about soybeans with a few yellow leaves higher up and the plant green leaves with dark spots starting. And Marty has went ahead and answered that and suggested please submitting those samples into the diagnostic lab so they can get looked at. And if you have pictures, please submit the pictures as well. Some emails have been provided here to the diagnostic lab by Aaron Hill. And so just that's a great reminder, right? As we're in a diseasey time of the year, if you're going to be submitting things, one, take a look at, because depending on what you're submitting, there are soybean and wheat forms that you can complete, and some diagnostic support could be there, financial. But as you submit things, please make sure if you take pictures, please email them in and be sampling not just diseased, but kind of a gamut of what is out in that field, right? Healthy, the unhealthy, or different stages of what you're sending in. They would appreciate that very much. Just pretty good instructions on the submission stuff, but just a reminder for that. And so now I think we're going to move on, Chris Stefanzo. And
Monica, there was a
yeah.
question about, I think, Roundup application in soybeans. I think someone was wondering about that too. I don't know if
soybeans starting to flower and the grass is coming up between that one.
Yep.
30-inch rows. It is a later plant, May 31st planting date. Can you spray with Roundup and surfactant? I think I saw Christy on
Yeah. I think the only thing I will say is
or
I think it
Aaron.
depends on the phenological stage yes, she's on. I think those beans might be at R2 by now, and I think that's the cutoff, right, Christy?
Yeah, basically you have through R2. So that is technically the label application. If there's grasses, there's also the option of doing one of the group 1 herbicides, whether it's something like Select Max or Assure 2. Just look at your pre-harvest interval dates on those.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I'm trying to see if I see any other weeds questions right now, but I don't think I do. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Chris because we've quite a bit of insect questions that have accumulated in here, Chris.
Can I share my screen
Of
first?
course, yeah.
Okay, I'm sharing it. They don't have it in presentation mode, but you probably can see that. We have a large number of corn leaf aphids that have accumulated, and it's in sort of that northern Illinois, northern Indiana sort of area, maybe touching into southern Michigan, but they were drier than us until Hurricane Beryl came through, so this could account for some of these things. So cornleaf aphid is that sort of olive green aphid that's at the top of the corn plant. So the picture on the left isn't very good. It just shows you their color. But on the right, this is a picture that was taken maybe this week in Indiana. More importantly, here's the kind of apocalyptic numbers on plants, and you even see leaf death because there's so many there. This is hybrid specific, apparently. It's not on all plants. Some of them are tolerating that the aphids are there. Usually this would happen later in the season and we wouldn't worry about it. If it's happening and the corn has already pollinated, I wouldn't really worry about it because the tassel gets gunked up and the silks get gunked up. But if it's pollinated, it doesn't matter. But, you know, people were concerned about this leaf death symptom. And, you know, again, there's going to be some guys that are going to spray down there. I don't know how it's going to work. I mean, I think a lot of the aphids are going to get killed eventually by fungus or whatever. But more importantly for us, they're flying this way. So they've generated a lot of winged ones. And this is a picture in my BT resistance plot at Swimwreck in Southwest Michigan that the extension agent took. And the top of that plant is covered with winged aphids. So he sent me this picture. And then I got all these calls out of Northern Indiana and I put the two together and I realized these aphids are just volcanoing out of these fields and coming, you know, being carried on winds. I'm not really concerned about this at this point, unless you have customers that maybe have a sweet corn. And I know that there's, you know, issues maybe with pollination and certain planting dates, or that customers don't want to touch aphids that, you know, that aphids on the husks and all this sort of thing. But from a field corn standpoint, I don't think this is just kind of a curiosity that you might see. And again, it's hybrid specific. And if you get the Indiana newsletter, the Purdue newsletter, they're going to put an article in it today or tomorrow. So you'll get to read more. I think I'll stop there for now.
Cool.
Except to say that Monica, I was in Monica's area yesterday. I know that there are failing rootworm fields in Michigan, failing BT corn rootworm fields that no one is talking about. And I'm just warning you that all the BT toxins are failing out west. Insecticides on top of those BT toxins are failing out west. And the new gene, which is RNAi, is beginning to have problems out west. So once you run out of things to do, there's one option, and that is crop rotation. And I know people don't want to talk about that when they're in corn on corn and livestock, but at some point, nature defeats you. And I think if you have customers that are in that kind of situation, you know, maybe we need to get with Kim Cassida and find a forage, an alternate forage that you can use for a year in some of these fields, because it doesn't matter what you say. In the end, some of these things, you're going to run out of things that you can use. And we also probably need to be tracking these things, reporting, tracking, understanding what's out there. So I'm a little bit concerned about corn rootworm, frankly.
Thank you, Chris, for that. Yeah, I think it's a very legitimate concern. Oh, did we have someone that needed again?
Just a follow-up, Chris, is that a singular trait of BT or when they were stacked multiple traits of the BT?
So out west, all the BTs have failed. And here, Cry3BB and the Cry3As are cross-resistant. And then Cry3435 also has issues. So everything is stacked now. So if you enter a field and it's on the ground, and what's happening is there was reports of so many beetles that they're causing, they're chewing the silks back and potentially causing pollination issues. If you walk into a field like that and it's a BT field, I would make an assumption right there that there's been, you should start looking underneath. I would assume that it has failed and that numerous adults have come out of that field and are now potentially you have a pollination issue. So you have, it's all stacked. So that would mean that multiple traits would have failed.
There's a question about Chinese beetle and dry beans and if what products work, insecticides work on them because they're seeing quite a bit in the thumb.
What beetle are we talking about?
Chinese beetles.
I don't know what I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Japanese beetles,
Japanese
maybe?
beetle,
Japanese,
perhaps?
maybe? That's
And
what
this is in what? I can't.
the
I'm
tip of
scrolling
the
down.
thumb and dry beans. We also have someone else asking about it too, in an organic production system in vegetables.
So for the vegetable question, I would call somebody in vegetables, but I do know, I mean, if you're talking about adults in organic, there's pyganic, which is pyrethrum, essentially. I've also, sometimes in vegetable production, they can use kaolin clay. I think there's a product called Surround. It's kind of a clay-based thing. And they might use that for beetles, but I would get with a vegetable person that understands what's registered in order to figure that one out, so I don't say something wrong. And the other question was in what? Dry beans, right?
Not organic.
You could use a pyrethroid, but unless they're eating actual pods, and I'm trying to think of what the defoliation threshold in dry beans would be, because you'd also have some grasshoppers out there. There's might be some Mexican bean beetle. There might be some bean leaf beetle. So I'd have to quickly look up. Scott Bales might be up on here now and could pop in and tell me what my threshold for
I don't know
defoliation is, but I would use that defoliation threshold and just manage it on the defoliation and not, I mean, a lot of times they're on the edges of fields and the edge looks bad, but when you walk into the field, they kind of diminish. Let me look this up here. You can do another question.
Yeah, no problem. The next question was about a larger pest, that's deer. And I'll just say really quick, yes, we do know that deer do affect different crops, right? They prefer, in general, soybeans over corn, you'll see in the landscape. And so what I would say, and we do know also within a crop, there's different varieties. If they have more sugar content, it typically drives more damage. But if knowing whether, like, if there's a certain rotation that deters deer more or less, that is not something that has been tested or that I'm aware of any literature, so that I could help answer that question better. So we've tried a lot of different products. We continue to try different products. I always say that with wheat, if you get varieties with more awns on them, that pretty well deters them. They don't like the bristling on their face. I have not found that solution in soybeans yet, but I continue to work on it. And so does James DeDecker and some of the other educators. We have plots in Michigan trying. This year we're trying sheep fat. So we'll have a report at the end there.
Monica, it's 15% defoliation. That's what I'm going to stick with.
15%.
And that could be anything.
Okay.
So you've got a number of pyrethroids, but I mean, I would hesitate to spray if you don't need to. And
okay. All right. And then there was a question about Western bean cutworm traps. And I know, oh, here, sorry, Clay, let me come right back to you. I know that people's traps have peaked. Some peaked like 10 days ago, some peaked last week, but we're kind of in that peaking time.
Yep.
For the
I've
central
peaked.
Michigan area, lower
And
Michigan.
I've found almost no egg masses.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
4 of us were in the field for 4 hours, so multiply that out.
Yesterday,
And
yeah.
we found 2, and that was, and it was corn I would egg lay in if I were a female.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep, pretty low flight counts below pressure. But this is the time I've talked to some dry bean growers that we would, if you wanted to scout and figure it out, please, head out and scout. Clay, did you have a question?
So
Uh-oh. You're breaking up pretty bad, Clay. I don't know if
10 years ago, with a natural biological. It's a long-term solution, but it works really well. They did it in courses on the west side of the state, and they've incorporated it now in food areas. They basically took that Japanese beetle, they've infected it with some kind of, and I don't know the big fancy term, apologize. You put it in the ground, and when the Japanese beetles larvae the next year come in contact with it, they die. In the long term, they don't have any more problems with Japanese beetles.
Yes, if you're going to do grub control, so like grub control in golf courses, there's some nematode options or some milky spore. You wouldn't do that around a big field, probably. And this entomopathogen that was actually natural, what they did was they ground up beetles, but that works in a golf course because they can kind of apply it in large amounts, and they watered it in, and they get these kind of populations going. I'm not sure how that would work in a field crop system, but we've actually found some natural pathogens like an Asiatic garden beetle that are already there. They just don't do the amount of control that you would need, I guess you could say.
Okay, and then there was one more question about if buckwheat can be a host for insects. Do you know if it's a large host?
Sure. You mean under the ground or above ground? Normally we think about buckwheat being good for pollinators. I don't,
Yeah,
I don't think I can't think of anything in particular that, I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, NRCS and the Midwest Cover Crop Council both has published data on like insect pressure that they have found with different kinds of cover crops. Sometimes we find there can be maybe more aphids or
Tarnish plant bug, I don't
right?
know,
Like
something like that.
so I
But
know there's charts out there that I could
in
try to.
general, you think about it being a pollinator, kind of a good.
Yeah, yep. Okay. I'm working back up through the list here. I see there's quite a bit of questions going back and forth about weather and dew prediction. So Jeff, I don't know if there's like a 1 second explanation for all of this dew chatter that's been going back and forth
I
in
was
here.
just starting on that one on the dew prediction real quickly. It's a complicated one. There's a lot of factors there, but look at the forecast of air temperature and of the dew point temperature. So you need to use both of those, and you're looking for generally times in the evening and the morning where you have relatively clear and calm conditions, less than 2 or 3 mile per hour winds, and that the air temperature drops down to the dew point. That's when dew forms, and so that's the key to it. I would look at the hourly forecasts of air temperature and dew point temperature especially for the short term. That's your best bet.
Okay, great. Thank you for giving that really fast. I know we're up against time. I just want to say Lyndon Kelly did post about scheduling recommendations from our irrigating educators, Angie and Lyndon. So please, if you can only hear this and you can't get to these links, If you Google Lyndon Kelly, you should be able to, find some of these links in here and an irrigation scheduling tool to help with your record keeping.
Monica,
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
going to say that it's 8:01 and normally we stop at 8 o'clock. And I will say that I'll just say thank you to everyone that's participated. Jeff, you're never second place in this group, okay? All right. But I will say that there are a lot of questions yet to go. If you're willing to stay on, you're welcome to stay on. We can keep the link open and we'll answer questions as long as people are here. But if you need to go or want to go, thank you for joining us and we'll just take it from here.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that, Phil. We are getting close actually. I know it looks like a lot in the chat box, but we have been working through them. Dennis, actually, I was going to pick on you next, so it's perfect that you've raised your hand. Somebody asked about growth regulators, and I was tempted to say Dennis Pennington may be the best person to ask about growth regulators. I don't know how you feel about that, but what's going on, Dennis?
Yeah, so before I answer that question, I have a question for you or Phil, maybe. I got a direct question. Is there a way for participants to save the chat? When I open up the chat and I click on the three dots, I get an option to save, and we're saying that they can't do that. So if if you know of a way for participants to do that, if not, maybe we can save the chat and send it out or something.
Yeah, we do try to answer all of them through the audio. That way that they can look back through the video and the audio recordings as a podcast as a resource. I don't know, Phil.
So I always have a copy of the chat. And if someone wants specific information out of the chat, I can certainly email information to them. I wouldn't email the entire thing because I think that would be
Lengthy.
overkill.
Yeah.
However, if there are specific questions, I can certainly send information to anybody via email and just use the email that I have that goes out to each and every person on Wednesday morning and Thursday morning. It's Kate's, KAATZ @msu.edu. I'll put it in the chat.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. And I also get the chat saved because I record these for the podcast. So you're welcome to Phil or I. There are some comments to, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, Dennis. Let me go back to you about the growth regulator.
No, you're fine. I actually sent a message to David, and he was talking
Perfect.
about dry beans. And so, yeah, I don't have any experience putting plant growth regulators on dry beans, but I am familiar with wheat. And he just sent another message, anything in vegetable.
Okay.
So yeah,
So
he's just looking for resources at MSU.
I would encourage you to reach out to Scott Bales. I don't think he's on today. I looked a little bit ago and I didn't see him. So I'd encourage you to reach out to Scott Bales. I'll try to pull his information and paste it into the chat box here. And then for vegetables, we do have a vegetable team, and Ben Phillips is a really great resource. He started about the same time I did, so he's a person I often send people to. So you might want to Ben Phillips and Scott Bales. I'll try to get their links in there for you, David.
Yeah, I sent him Scott Bales, but I did not send him so
vegetables up here, you should be sending him to Salta now. We have Salta as our regional person for vegetables up here.
Yeah, I didn't know where David was to know that he's in that area.
Yeah, I think he's up Thumbway, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, then yes, Salta would be another vegetable educator. I think I can just paste in the vegetable team. So, all right, moving forward here. Okay, Japanese beetles. I think we are almost done. Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to say about wheat harvest? I didn't know if nope.
No, not our wheat harvest is mostly wrapped up in the state. USDA raised their state average yield again. So we're currently sitting at 89, which ties a record high in the state. We are working on our variety trial report. I've got preliminary data out to the seed companies already. They are responding to that. We hope to have that report out mid next week to the public. So things are moving along there quite well.
Great. And then We did have quite a bit about hay making questions, and I know I asked Jeff about to explain the dew point stuff quickly. Kim, I see you're on. I don't know, and also you raised your hand, but are you able to kind of summarize some of those hay making questions? And did you have anything you would like to add about what's going on with forages?
I put a text answer in the chat, but I know some people can't see that. So
Yep.
there was a question about whether potential evapotranspiration or PET would give a good estimate of hay drying weather. And the answer to that is yes. Because anything that's fostering good evapotranspiration is going to help water evaporate out of your hay. So I'm not aware of any research that has been done on that, but I'm not sure we need any because we know that it would work.
I don't know, Chris, if you can answer a nematode question before you jump off. Or if that's
what kind
not.
of nematode question?
It says the Z15 biologic, a new product for nematodes. We know anything about it?
No.
Okay.
Most nematode products, nematodes need very particular environmental conditions to make them successful. Say in a lawn care kind of situation, in lawns and in golf courses, they can often water them in. So when you purchase nematode products, they often are more successful in some situations than others. I have a colleague named Elson Shields who is at Cornell, and he was trying to develop kind of a nematode that was sort of based on field collections rather than colony kind of things, which sometimes are not very successful. And he's been getting some interesting data on top of corn rootworm. But you have to apply it in some way and get it on. And so that's something kind of interesting, but thus far, for big infestations of things, can be expensive and hasn't been particularly successful in some times. So
okay, all right. And I did look quick. I don't see Marisol on, so thank you so much for being able to answer that, and we'll let you get to the field, Chris. I am, unless I've missed something, I think I have made it through all the questions. Oh, just kidding. Thanks, Phil. How widespread is Phytophthora in Michigan this year? And I did see some questions about root rots in general. Marty, are you still on? I know I sent in a sample that was positive, and that was in Saginaw.
Yep, I'm here. Yeah, there's quite a bit. I mean, it's no surprise given the heavy precipitation events that we had a couple of weeks ago now. So yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of Phytophthora root rot. I think the big message there is that the RPS1C and 1K genes that we've used a lot are no longer effective. So I think it's RPS3 or 3A that is the one that still has pretty good efficacy. So that would be one to look at. But then you also want to look at what we call field tolerance, which is contributed by many different genes acting together. So look in the catalog for field tolerance. That could be a big difference, even in a variety that has the RPS1K that might not be offering much protection. If you've got that field tolerance, that'd be something to look at. Seed treatments with mefenoxam and other oomycete products can be something that'll assist too at planting.
Awesome. All right. Sounds like you guys are on the way to school. So, all right. Well, with that, not seeing any more questions, I just wanted to mention we had quite a few people that asked like specialty crop questions. I definitely want to make sure you find the right resource or person to help you with that. So if we have not answered that, maybe got lost a little bit in the chat, or just didn't get through, please reach out to myself or Phil. We would be happy to connect you with the vegetable team or the ornamental team. I want to make sure that people that had non-field crop questions like we weren't as helpful with, that we can get you to that right resource. The specialists that are currently on, if I haven't gotten to you and you did have an update you wanted to share, something going in the field, I want to make sure you have that chance. Otherwise, I'll call it. All right. One last note. Every year we try to do a couple of these hot topics. I really enjoy them. Topics come up that maybe we wouldn't have heard of or covered. So I really appreciate you all getting on and being prepared to ask a lot of questions. It is a little bit of a rodeo in the chat box, but I really enjoy doing these sessions. And I also thank all the specialists for coming ready to answer whatever gets thrown at you, and also having Chris and Marty for having a couple prep slides for us for current breaking news. So appreciate the team, appreciate all of you attending, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Sounds like it's going to be beautiful weather. Thank you, Jeff, for making that happen.